And the battle is yours. Look at them fall.
What is up there everyone, it's the guy from the Gamertech here, and today I think it's about time I finally gave a full review of Destiny 2. Now I just need to get a few brief things out of the way first. Firstly, the reason it's titled a Newbie's Review is that I am a new player to Destiny. I only played Destiny 2, never the original. Also, there will be story spoilers, so if you haven't played through the game and you're planning to, do not watch this video, it will spoil the storyline. And thirdly, the content I've been able to play in the game, I've played all of it except for Prestige events and Trials of the Nine. Everything else I've had the opportunity to play in this game. Now, the first things first, you've got to address the story. It's a fun story and it definitely was entertaining to play, but it really was lacking in a lot of aspects. I think the problem they had with it, they needed a way to justify their decision to make it so that players couldn't carry their gear from Destiny 1. So in order to achieve this, they had a storyline where Ghoul, he takes away your light, he takes away your stuff, but most importantly Cayde's stuff, and he basically completely resets your Guardian. You start at almost zero power, and you've got to fight your way back up. Now, while that's an interesting story, and it could have definitely led to some really cool adversity, you get given your light back in the second bloody mission. You have almost no adversity in this game because you are instantly the only Guardian with your light, and this fundamentally spoils the potential for good storytelling elements. The reason that there's no good character development is you never actually do anything with any of the characters. You only ever hear their chatter over the radio and their odd bits of sass and banter. Yes, while those are good and they're interesting, it just doesn't develop any of their characters. You don't find yourself feeling really interested about their backstory or what their motives are, because you never find out, you just get odd bits of dialogue. And I will say the joke writing was fun, it was definitely entertaining, and I did enjoy listening to what Cayde said as a character just because his jokes were pretty funny. But when that's all he is as a character, is a joker, you can't connect with him or any of the other characters, because him and Failsafe are really some of the only memorable characters. And mostly just because they're the ones that get the jokes. And I felt this especially with Hawthorne's character. You notice in some of the Earth story missions and adventures, you get odd bits of dialogue between her and Devrim Kay, which kind of hint what life was like for her outside the city. And that would have been really interesting, getting to like fight alongside her and actually just sort of find out more about her. That would have been really interesting and would have led to some really cool character arcs, but they just didn't go for it because you're the Guardian, you've got your light back, no one else has their light, so pretty much you've got to go and do everything. And it meant that actually all the missions were pretty easy. You were basically overpowered for the whole game, apart from the very brief sequence between you losing the light and you getting it back in the next mission. That's the only time there was any adversity in the game, and it meant that whilst it was fun to be able to use your supers and everything, which is the core of Destiny, it wasn't challenging. And what's more, the AI in this game certainly wins short-sighted AI of the year, because you can just hit them from just outside their range and they won't do anything. They'll just move between cover, they won't actually shoot back. They are surprisingly stupid and it certainly adds to the fact that there isn't much challenge to the game. I understand the choice they made with the plot of the story. However, I think it could have been done better to still allow old players and new to get into Destiny, understand the powers, how they all work, the light and everything, to get a bit of background of the lore, and then to have this adversity and the reason to take away their gear. The way I would have personally done it is that at the beginning of the game you get this strange signal from another galaxy or perhaps another solar system, something like that, and you are sent there to investigate what this is. Is it a threat? Is it actually just another species that you haven't encountered yet? And that way you get to go to another galaxy. Now, to justify their decision to make sure people can carry their gear forwards, how about you make it so that because you're going to another galaxy, something about the light is a bit different. You're further away from the traveller than ever, so it means that the light works differently, and perhaps also because of different gravity or perhaps even different elements in the planets, your weapons work differently, so you have to then start again. You have to learn how to use the light in this new galaxy. You get to relearn all your powers, and then you also have to recraft all of your old weapons. You then have to make them so that they can actually work in this new galaxy. Then you find out that at the end of it, it was perhaps just a Red Legion decoy. You go back for the Homecoming mission, where Ghoul then completely takes away your light. Instead of your Guardian instantly be given back your light, you then actually have to fight Ghoul without it. That way, you can work with Soraya Hawthorne, you can work with Devrin Kay. You might actually get to do something with the Vanguard. I mean, they are supposed to be the most badass Guardians there are, and yet you do nothing with them. All they do is make some sarcastic comments standing around in the tower all day. How badass are they supposed to be when they just stand there making jokes all day every day? It would be really cool to be able to actually do some things with the NPCs. You've got a more interesting story, better lore, you'd have also had a lot more character development, and it would have made the story seem a lot more whole. The problem is, as much as it was an entertaining story, it just didn't have the depth that a game like Destiny needs. It's a space age game, you've got aliens, you've got laser guns, you've got this weird power that allows you to do incredible things, and very little of it ever gets explained. It just doesn't have the scope a game like Destiny should have, and that's why it really was lacking as a story. It felt a lot like they were saying, hey look, we put a story in the game. We might have done the bare minimum, but we did put a story in this time. It's like, yes, well done Bungie, you have actually put a story in the game, but this is 2017. There have been many games that have come out and they've got a story right first time. Uncharted, Horizon Zero Dawn, just to name a couple. And so if you release a story that is just subpar and it just doesn't do anything special, it can't get much praise. It needs to be something special, and unfortunately the story, although entertaining, wasn't that special. And also, a slightly smaller point, in terms of some of the actual fluidity of the game when you progress from actual gameplay into a cutscene, there is a bit of a mismatch going on here. Now, the reason I point this out is when you go and play Uncharted, which is the series that has absolutely nailed this, when you go from a gameplay sequence to a cutscene and then to the next gameplay sequence, it is fluid. You barely notice the change between them because it's so fluid. You get a dip to black transition and then it instantly goes into the cutscene, the next transition, and then you're straight back into the gameplay. There's no extra loading screen, there's no downtime, it really flows fluidly. Now, one thing I found with Destiny 2 is that it really lacked this in some cases. Quite often you would have a loading screen between two cutscenes, which seemed completely pointless, but considering that a cutscene essentially might as well be an animated loading screen. The worst one I did encounter was actually on this mission on Nessus, was where it went from a cutscene to a half cutscene. It's one of those ones where it's more or less a loading screen with dialogue, then to another loading screen before you actually then spawn back in on the planet. It's really unfluid, and it's just a small thing. When games manage to get that fluidity, it feels really good, it feels really smooth, and it was just one thing that Destiny also was lacking. And then there is a fundamental problem with some of the mission structure. Now, generally I had a bit of fun in the missions, even though you were fundamentally overpowered for the entire campaign, and there wasn't really a challenging boss fight in it. The missions were fun to play. However, I do have some gripes. Firstly, especially on the Moon Titan, areas get reused a lot. The Pacific Arcology, and then the Hydro Rigs. Those were reused a lot. There wasn't much area to this map, so they kept reusing the same areas. Now, I wouldn't mind that if it wasn't for the fact that every time a mission ended, you then had to go back to the base to start the next mission, which took you straight back to the same place. This was especially noticeable for the end game missions. You go into the Pacific Arcology, you find this knight, and then it buggers off. You then have to go back out to where Sloane is, start the next mission, it sends you straight back in there. You've got to fight your way back into the Pacific Arcology again. And it does that about 2 or 3 times. It's like, why? Couldn't there have just been a button to say, I would like to start the next mission immediately? Or, how about this, a bit groundbreaking, why don't you put the mission's starting location where the last mission ended? Whoa, next gen right here. I'm sorry, it just got ridiculous. If you're going to have missions starting in the same place another one ended, and they are consecutive missions, just make it easy to go from one to the other. Stop giving us this filler time where we keep having to go back and forwards all the time. It got incredibly annoying. And then what's more, there were just so many areas and other maps that weren't used. The Pyramidion, for example, that got used for a couple of missions in one strike. Why couldn't you use that in some of the campaign? That could have been really awesome. And then there's also a lot of areas in the European Dead Zone. Mavic Square and that great big wall and motorway kind of place you went to when you originally went to find the Shard of the Traveller. You used those like once or twice and then you never go back to them. Mavic Square looks quite cool. That could have been a whole new, like, not necessarily social area, but there could have been events there. There could have been stuff going on there to make that area actually useful. There's a lot of space in the European Dead Zone and some of it just doesn't get used. Now, I will give credit to Bungie, the actual planets and moons and maps themselves, they do feel alive, they do feel interesting with the public events, which I have really enjoyed. I thought it would be a really cool idea, that perhaps where you've got the big wall where you went to fight with the Shard of the Traveller, or perhaps you just have this wall somewhere around the European Dead Zone, You've got a resource crew. They were sent out. These were some of the refugees from the camp. They all got sent out to collect some resources for the farm. They are then trying to get them back. But before they can get them to the European dead zone where they can be transmatted, their Fallen are starting to attack them. You have to now head off, perhaps with Devrim Kay and Soraya. Maybe that would be interesting. Or perhaps this is a public event that you and other Guardians can do it. Now the mechanics of it is that as the supplies are coming in, you have to defend them from the Fallen. The more of the NPCs the Fallen manage to kill, the more supplies you lose. You have to go out and you have to try and stop the Fallen trying to take these supplies. But the closer your supplies get to this wall, the more Fallen are going to turn up, and the more larger Fallen and beefier Fallen are you going to have to try and take out. I'm not perhaps imaginative enough to come up with the mechanics exactly, but what the end reward would be is that the more supplies you get through, the better rewards you can get, because that would make sense. If you've got more supplies, you've got more things you can give out as rewards. So perhaps you managed to get through without losing a single NPC. You've got all the supplies. Perhaps you get an exotic engram or just a lot of legendary items. Something like that. Make it rewarding and make it scaled. If your team does really well, you get really good loot. It will still be random. You still won't know exactly what piece you're going to get, but you will know you're going to get better loot for having performed better in that activity. And it makes sense because you've got more supplies, so you can get better rewards. This is the sort of thing which they could have done in the game, but for whatever reason they didn't. I'm not saying that this would absolutely fix the game, but I think it would be something nice. It would be a nice change from what we've already got. I do like the public event, and the mechanics they've added in so that you can then change it to a heroic event were quite interesting. It was fun to learn how to do those. But at the same time, after a few months, you've learnt them all. You kind of want that bit of spice, that bit of variety that can be added in to make the game feel fresh again. And that's the slight problem I've had with it. It's a fun game, and for a while it is definitely very interesting to play, but once you've been playing it for a while, it's just the same thing over and over again. They've been rather complacent with trying to add in new things for us to do, especially just for base game players. At first they tried to just lock away a lot of the content for base game players. Fortunately the community fought back and this has been rescinded. However, it just seems that as time goes on, they're just adding in more content for the people that are going to buy the expansions. Now, I would like to address this quickly because Bungie say they want to make this a game that people will make their hobby. That they will go home and this is what they're going to want to do. I would like Destiny to be my hobby, but I don't see the commitment from the development team for it to be a game that is going to be worth it being my hobby. I would make this game my hobby if it was worth my time. I enjoy the game, but that isn't enough. There are so many games that get it right first time. Horizon Zero Dawn is one of the main ones. I'm going to be playing Titanfall 2. Rainbow Six Siege is a game that gets constant content updates and has improved massively as a game, whereas Destiny, it's just sort of stayed the way it was and they're just adding in more expansions. They're not actually focusing at the moment on trying to improve the game. They're just trying to release more expansions so they can get more money out of their player base. The game's feeling more like a cash cow, less like a game, and that's what's worrying me. I don't want to put my money into a game that is only interested in my money. I want to be putting my money into games that I'm going to have a lot of enjoyment over a long period of time, and that's why I can't commit to making Destiny 2 my hobby. But some of the best content in the game for me was the raid and the nightfalls. They added a little bit more challenge to the game, which I really enjoyed. Now there were a couple of things that I wasn't so keen on with the nightfalls. Firstly was the modifiers. I do like what they do, they make it a little bit more challenging, you've got these other things you need to take into account. But I think it may have been better if for each nightfall there was perhaps a small pool of different modifiers that could go well with that nightfall, and they were selected randomly. Because at the moment, if you learn the modifiers, you know exactly how to beat that nightfall every single time. Unless you're going for the prestige event, which is going to be a lot more difficult, which I've unfortunately not been able to do. You just know exactly how to beat it repeatedly, and the challenge isn't there for as long. The only exception there is Salvatori's song, which for me as a solo player is extremely difficult. And it does lead me into the next problem, which is guided games. I really like guided games. They've been really useful for me because I don't always have a fire team to play with, so guided games are a really useful way for me to just get matched up with a couple of players, and they can help me through it. However, there is a fundamental flaw with it. I don't believe guided games actually checks whether the guides have actually played the Nightfall before. I have played Nightfalls where the guides don't have a clue what they're doing. I was playing Salvatori's song, my two guides were 300 power, I think maybe 290, something like that. But they were both completely ignoring the time warp anomalies. They weren't bothering to destroy them so we got extra time. They clearly didn't look at the modifiers, and they also clearly didn't know what to look for, and they didn't bother with them. And it leads me to suspect that they had never actually played that Nightfall before. So why are they guiding me? I know how to beat it. I'm only in guided games because I don't have anyone to play with. But yet these two people, who are supposedly my guides, don't actually know what they're doing. That's a fundamental flaw with the system. And here's the underlying problem: they can't actually fix it, because if they were going to have to add new parameters to the matchmaking for guided games, it's going to make the queue times even longer, and considering queue times are already 15 minutes, 20 minutes, perhaps even 40 minutes for some players, it's going to get a bit excessive and no one's going to want to use the feature. Unfortunately, it perhaps needed a bit more thought into it, because it's a useful feature, but it does have some fundamental flaws. Because for some people, they know how they're doing. They're competent players, but they don't have people to play with. They would probably be a more useful guide than two people that have never played it before. Just because they're a two-man party doesn't mean they know what they're doing. It doesn't mean they can actually guide you through it. It's a bit annoying when you are supposed to be the guided player and you're actually the one leading the team. It's a bit annoying, and it just kind of takes away from some of the enjoyment. And whilst I have enjoyed playing the Nightfalls, the guided games issues have made it a little bit more frustrating, especially when it's Salvatori's song. And it would also be better if the same Nightfall doesn't come up 2 weeks in a row. I can take doing Salvatori's song, it's difficult, it's challenging, and it will be fun to do every now and then, but when you've got it 2 weeks in a row, I have no interest in doing it. Yeah, it was difficult for the first week. I don't want another week of having to put up with that. I am not playing it 2 weeks in a row. It gets incredibly annoying. There's more than one strike in this game. It perhaps needs to be selected a little bit better. And then briefly, there is also the Crucible. I would say the less said about the Crucible the better, because although I originally thought it was fun, it is a bit of a clusterfuck, and for me it got quite annoying. I haven't been able to try the Mayhem mode. Perhaps that's going to make it a bit more fun, I'm not sure, but I haven't really enjoyed my time with the Crucible that much. At first I thought the way that players would group together and sort of team shot each other was actually quite fun. It was a bit of teamwork, but actually it's baby's first teamwork. It really isn't. It's I'm going to stick with my teammates because I stand less chance of dying. And the way the time to kill works, and being so slow, means if you have one really good player who's up against another two players who aren't as skilled, that good player can't win because the time to kill is so slow and the game so incentivizes team shotting because of it that that player never stands a chance. It means if you have anyone quit out on your team is almost guaranteed to lose because the enemy have strength in numbers, and that is all this multiplayer is about, and it just fundamentally gets annoying. And then there's also people being able to run around with a sword all game because the power ammo seems to spawn in their favour all the time. I feel like the swords perhaps have too much ammo because people seem to just be able to run around with these things all game long, and it gets incredibly annoying. And finally, I would like to also talk about the raid. The raid actually for me was pretty fun. Some people might actually say that it wasn't the best raid in the world, but for me, someone who's never actually played a raid in a game before, I found it quite fun. It required a lot of teamwork and coordination, and that was what was enjoyable about it. It was also, being able to play in a 6-man fire team was a lot of fun. And what's more, you just get to have a laugh with the players you're playing with in between the encounters. I did find the raid fun, and it was an enjoyable part of the game. Fundamentally, my thoughts on Destiny 2 are that it's a fun game. It could be really good. It could be a really great game. But at the moment, it just is hollow. It doesn't have the scope that a game like it should have. I want this game to be amazing, but at the moment, the development seems somewhat complacent to actually make it change. It doesn't seem to be developing into a great game yet. Now, a lot of people might draw comparisons to Destiny 1, where it actually took until the Taken King expansion for the game to actually start really improving. But I don't want to have to wait that long. I don't want to have to put money in to make this game better. This game should be fixed for everyone before we have to give up our money to play more. I will be happy to part with my cash on a big expansion that really helps add a lot of life to the game, only if they actually show some commitment to making the game more fun for those who haven't paid for the expansions yet. But anyway, I do hope you've enjoyed the video and perhaps found it useful. This has been the guy with no gamertag, and I'll see you on another video.